And later that night, I get a call, and it's from a producer. And he says, "Hey, my friend sent me this website. I'm looking for a film location, shoots in 2 days. Can you help me?" Again, being me, I'm like, of course. We have tons of locations. No problem. I hang up the phone and I spent all night on Google Satellite View. He was looking for a house with a pool. I spent all night trying to find pools in the city.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Hello. Welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Cheesehead himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how's it going, man? What's going on?
I am ready for football season and Green Bay Packers football. They crushed the Steelers in the preseason, which means absolutely nothing, just like the points and whose line is dead anyway. But I'm excited for the season to get underway.
Yeah, and by the time this episode airs, I think we will be at kickoff, which is pretty exciting.
Pretty exciting. Yeah, big season for the Packers ahead, I hope. I'll be honest, I mostly stick to the NFL these days so I can do something with my dad. But I do enjoy it. I think Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback in football. I'm a little worried about their defense and their offensive tackles, per usual, but I'm excited about it. You're a Packers fan.
I am a Packers fan after a Browns fan. So when the Browns went away in the 90s, I had to pick a team, and I was a big Brett Favre fan. So the Packers were the logical next choice for me. My dad's from Buffalo, so third team is the Bills. That's my 1, 2, 3.
Do you know anything more about the Packers season this year than I do?
I know that Devonta Adams is going to have a monster year, so there's my inside scoop if you play fantasy like Jay does in my league. So
I know that our top 1 or 2 linebackers is out for the season already because he hurt himself stretching.
Fun fact, Jake Ryan went to my... Wait, he hurt himself stretching?
I thought that's what somebody told me. I have not fact-checked this, but somebody told me he tore his ACL during warm-ups.
Oh, I didn't know that. But I did know he tore his ACL. He went to my grade school, and I went to school with his older brother.
Well, you should just text him and let him know that we wish him the best.
Will do. Get well soon from the Upside Podcast.
Jake Ryan.
Wow, starting off with ACL tears. That is a way to start the podcast off on a high note. Speaking of the podcast, let's get back to it. If you are new to the podcast, we're going to run through in the next 60 to 90 seconds what the podcast is and how it's kind of laid out. If you are a avid listener and you listen every week and you don't need to know what that is, go ahead and fast forward 90 seconds. So Jay, what are we doing here?
Here at Upside, we talk to founders outside of Silicon Valley. We think it's a great time for entrepreneurship outside of Silicon Valley, and we talk to those entrepreneurs every week, people from states like Ohio and Minneapolis and Indiana, Kansas. St. Louis is a city that is in Missouri. But we think it's a great time for entrepreneurship outside of the Valley. And every week we're here trying to prove just that with founders that we believe are extremely intelligent, opportunity seeking, capital efficient, resilient. And so today we are talking to a founder outside of the United States even currently, Alex Kolodkin, the founder and CEO of SetScouter. Previous to SetScouter, Alex earned a Master in Arts and Media Production and a Bachelor of Arts in Radio and Television Arts from Ryerson University. SetScouter is a marketplace connecting brands with residential spaces. Think Airbnb for connecting producers who are shooting video to location scouting. So Eric, what is the format of our podcast?
Well, our podcast is broken down into 3 segments. The first is an upfront where Jay and I kind of talk about our independent research that we've done on the founder, the company, and the opportunity. Then we dive into an interview where we answer questions about those same 3 things. And then the really exciting part of this for Jay and I is when we get to take all of that information we've done in the upfront and all of the information we learned in the interview, and we get to put those together in what we call our verbal hypothetical deal memo. Jay, you like to say that the deal memo is your favorite part of the podcast. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
100%. This podcast largely is an effort for Eric and I to get better at thinking like early stage angel investors, and that deal memo is where the magic happens. So if you're like us and you're trying to learn more about the angel investing process, we think that's going to be one of your favorite segments of the show. where we kind of break down what we learned from the founder and how we would approach that information as a potential investor.
And we hope that if you are like us, you don't treat that section as passive, but rather you actively participate with us. Jay, how can people do that?
Totally. And if you guys do enjoy that and you have thoughts both about what we say and what we don't say, we'd love to hear from you on Twitter at UpsideFM or on our preferred podcasting platform, Breaker, where you can comment directly on the episode in real time, the point you're listening to, and we can communicate with you directly there. So that's the plug. Eric, I'm excited to talk about SetScouter here today before we get in and talk with Alex. A couple of things that he provided with us, like I said, based in Toronto, Ontario, founded in 2012, has gone through a few accelerators, one of which being the 500 Startups Batch 15, in which we've talked to both RapChat and Lawn Guru already, same batch. And right now they're operating in, I couldn't get an exact number of cities, but I know they have 6 sort of top cities that they bill: Toronto, Miami, Austin, Chicago, New York City, and Los Angeles. Anything else from the research that you're excited to touch on and talk about?
They have 1 listing in Cincinnati, so
None in Columbus.
maybe they have none in Columbus, none in Cleveland. I didn't do much searching outside of those. The one thing that kind of jumps out to me in the information Alex submitted is found in 2012. That's 6 years ago. There's been a lot of probably development in those 6 years. This is probably one of the older companies we've interviewed here on Upside.
A lot of presumed development, team of 12 people, so still a relatively small team for that period of time. Outside of what we know to be a check from 500 startups, or assume they got a check from 500 startups, as most companies do, we have no data, or I have no data about their fundraising to date. Do you have anything?
I do not.
So it may stand to reason that they probably have fairly significant cash flow in, at least. No idea what their cash expenses are other than overhead and support and, the cost of development. But yeah, I would imagine the cash dynamics of this business are pretty interesting, especially from, I assume, an insurance perspective.
Right. So either this is economically attractive, where it's throwing off a lot of cash, or they have a supplementary income where this is something that they're developing and they're using their own personal income to fund the development of this platform, maybe why it's taken so long. But either way, we need to have a better understanding of what the market opportunity is here. Did you find anything on market sizing?
The best I could find was some data from Alex's own 2015 500 Startups Demo Day pitch, where he talked about 10 million commercials being shot annually, which I would assume was just a segment of what they're available to do. So that's not even a great market size metric for me. He talked about in 2015, they had a $250,000 gross merchandising value going through the platform, 110,000 of that being in the last 3 months. So one would assume that growth rate has increased or remained over the last 3 years. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of data here we just don't have available at our fingertips. Did you find anything in the way of market sizing?
I didn't. So what I tried to find was things related to location scouting and what the size of the location scouting market was. I saw one number that's placed the market at 350 million. I don't know if that is for location scouts globally, if that is, that would be my guess on what it is, but the number didn't seem to have a lot of support. So it's the only number I could find.
I think part of the commercials being shot as an attractive or closer metric is, location scouting may be a small number, but we're looking at the full number of things that would need locations to scout for. If the process is really as gross and terrible as SetScouter claims that it is, there's probably a lot of media and production happening that could be happening on site somewhere if they had tools to do that. As part of my role with LinkedIn Learning as a course producer, I talked to my producer about this the last time I was out there shooting. And he did say that it's kind of a nightmare to do on-site location shooting because they have to find them. He talked about how terrible that process was. And when I told him, well, I think we are talking with a founder who has a company that helps do that, his first reaction was, oh, that'd be great. We do that all the time. And his second reaction was, well, but then again, right now they talk to the homeowners directly through things like Airbnb or VRBO, and they ask if they can bring a small production crew to come out and shoot in the home with the explicit expectation that there's going to be production happening in the home. His thought was it may be more expensive for the production crew because the homeowner would be more educated on what is happening and what may be on the table for them as a homeowner providing that location.
That's interesting because I've read a lot of articles in preparation for this about being a location scout, and it just seems like such a gravy train job. I don't know what the margins they get or the fees they get, but I got to assume that they are very high. But all you do is travel the world and find places that people are looking for. And I'm like, man, that is pretty cool, and they seem to be pretty well off from the people who are writing the articles.
Yeah, my assumption is these production teams, at least the major production teams, which are the companies that SetScouter seems to work with, Universal Studios, McDonald's, Google, Unilever, these people who do a lot of production and have experienced teams with presumably large budgets, they presumably have that large budget that they are just mostly looking for the right place. And once they have that, they can kind of sign off and check that off their line item to say, okay, this is booked and here's the price that we had for that. And as a location scout, that'd probably be pretty nice to play matchmaker in that way.
So location scouts and location scout agencies seem to be one type of competitor. The other type of competitor that you mentioned is a little more indirect. It's companies not using a location scout or just using someone on their team to go onto Airbnb and message hosts and say, hey, we like your spot. Can we use it? We'll pay you more than the $200 a night you're asking. We'll pay you $1,000 a day for the next, 4 days or whatever. And then one other potential competitor that I found was locationshub.com.
I also found that.
Okay.
Seems very young.
It seems very young, especially in comparison to SetScouter, but I'm curious if there is any difference or what they're doing that is unique.
Yeah, seemed young, seemed like they didn't have nearly the technology built, but it is a recent entrant into the market, it would seem. I think the biggest competitors here would be Airbnb, VRBO, where those companies have tons of inventory of just, we'll call them locations, not necessarily production locations, but presumably any location could be a production location with the right conversation and the right agreement. So we'll be interested to hear from Alex what that competition means to him and how SetScouter postures themselves differently, positions themselves differently in that market. All right, you ready to talk to Alex?
Let's do it. Whoa, here we are. One more thing. Jay, is there something you want to tell the people?
I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is I've started to invest more into the podcast in the form of a new laptop. The bad news is because of this investment, I did not reset my audio settings. And so this interview may sound a little different because I screwed up. I messed up some of the audio settings and we had to do some extra editing to fix it. And you'll still hear some artifacts of key clicking in the background, which I apologize for. But here in a couple weeks, once we get rolling recording again, that will no longer be an issue. So thank you for bearing with us and we apologize for any inconvenience. Okay, on to the interview.
Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. We like to start with the founder and kind of some of your background. So can you tell us about the history of Alex?
Sure. I'll keep it pretty short. I used to produce commercials. That's what I was doing. I was a corporate commercial producer. And it wasn't until I actually worked as a broadcaster and got to see all the expenses of production that I went, there's something we can do here. So like the history of me is essentially I'm overly optimistic and some would say I'm a little bit cocky. And I thought I could build a company and sell it for $1 million a year later to try to get into grad school and do an MBA program at Harvard. It's been 5 years and I don't think I want to do my MBA anymore.
Well, take us back a little bit before that. How did you get into producing commercials and being a broadcaster? What was that like way before SetScouter even started?
Yeah, so like every immigrant, family, my mom wanted me to be one of one thing, which is a doctor. And I just never really thought that I could do that. So I started really getting into film and production. And it wasn't until high school that I beat out these university students to get this internship. And that was kind of the start. So I got this internship. I went to an amazing university in Toronto. And I just started working in the industry and I fell in love with it. Like, quite frankly, there's so much happening and you can be so creative and so technical. I just love the fact that I could do that. So that's how I just joined the industry.
And you mentioned immigrant family. Did you immigrate to Canada, or did your parents, or how did that all work?
Yeah, so I am actually an immigrant, which I get reminded of every time I say something funny. I moved here when I was 1, so I like to say that I made the trek myself with a little backpack. But in all honesty, my mother and my father and my uncle, we actually immigrated here in 1990. And yeah, I grew up in Edmonton and then moved to Toronto.
So you went through high school in Toronto, where you got into film, it sounds like. Talk to me about which university you went to, or did you go the university route?
I did. So the great thing about being at this internship when I was in high school was I got to see the different people at the office and where they went to school. And I noticed that the people that were working really hard doing the amazing creative stuff all went to colleges. And college in Canada is a little bit different than it is in the US. It's more like a trade school. It's a shorter program. And I noticed that all the people that were doing the strategy, that were owning the companies, they actually all went to one program, which was Ryerson University's Radio and Television Arts program. So I knew from right there that I would want to go to that school. I'd applied to other places, but luckily I got in. And so I did 4 years of undergrad there. That's actually where I met my co-founder, Lydia Bay-Unin. And then part of being in an immigrant family is everybody in my family have graduate degrees. So it was kind of expected that I had to go to grad school. And luckily, Ryerson offered me a position in the master's program. So right after school, I just went from my bachelor's to my master's.
And that was a master's in media production, right?
It's a master's in media production. And actually, my thesis focused on the content consumption behaviors of 18 to 25-year-olds. And how that came about was really, I was sitting there thinking, like, what am I going to write my thesis on while I was eating cereal in my underwear, watching pirated TV? And I went, holy smokes, if I'm doing this, there's something there. And that was awesome. So I got to present that to the board at Rogers Communication, which is where I actually worked as well, and got to blow their minds with how piracy works and how 18 to 25-year-olds at the time were consuming content. It was an incredible opportunity. And actually, grad school was amazing because it taught me, I feel like I knew how to write in undergrad, but grad school taught me how to think. And so that experience was just amazing.
Forgive my ignorance here. Ryerson, is that in Toronto?
Ryerson is in downtown Toronto, the heart of the city. And so it's not as well known to Americans. I think you guys only know University of Toronto and McGill, but Ryerson is probably the best broadcasting school in the country.
Okay, so help me clear or understand this jump then into broadcasting. I'm guessing that was after grad school.
Yeah, broadcasting was actually in my last year of undergrad going into grad school. What that meant was essentially I worked for the department that is a VC. So we would look at multiple productions. People would pitch us their shows, and we would decide whether we're going to finance them or not, whether it fit into our mandate, into our thesis, and whether we could actually get a return on it. Being in Canada meant that we had to have a certain portion of our broadcast be Canadian. So we had to look at these Canadian producers and these Canadian creators and see who we could fund. And so my job was to evaluate it. And it was a really great opportunity because I got to be on the other side of things. So where my friends were coming up with show ideas and trying to pitch it, I had the incredible opportunity to actually sit on the other side and say, okay, this is what we would be looking for. This is the holes in your argument. This is what you should say. This is what you should think about. And that was invaluable.
So because I'm American and I need to put this in terms I understand.
Yeah, no problem.
You were working for the equivalent of like an NBC or a CBS, determining television broadcasting schedules.
Not the schedules themselves, but the actual creation and development of the show. So look at it this way. If you're an American, you pretty much have tons of money that you're going out there and creating your content. In Canada, it works a little bit differently. I have a really great show idea. I don't have deep pockets from a studio. So I have to get a broadcaster to essentially license my content and pay for it. And so you pitch them and say, hey, if you commit 30% of our budgets, we'll give you the rights to show it in this capacity. And producers use that to budget their shows. So they'll say, okay, we know we can get money from Rogers to film this, to do season 1. We can also get this tax incentive to fill the hole there. We can raise this amount of private money to kind of get there. So my job was, I was essentially the large VC in a deal.
So how did you develop the finance chops to do all that? Because it sounds like you went to broadcast school for undergrad and then your master's. Did you just kind of pick it up naturally, or what was that process like?
I'd say anything finance to me does not come natural. I'm definitely a creator at heart. So in school, we learned a lot about it. There's an amazing professor, James Nadler, who taught business of production, of producing. And so a lot of that course is, if you were to create a show, how would you finance it? And so you had to look at, all of the available tax credits and all of the available opportunities and try to finance it. And so that was just an extension of that course, I'd say.
So you mentioned you're a creator. Do you still create things? What do you create? What's natural to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think over the years, it's really evolved. And at this point, I'm very content with the fact that what I get to create enables other creators to do amazing work. And so I focus all my energy on SetScouter and building out the product and getting it to a point that I'm proud to be part of, thousands of productions.
And so if I'm filling in the gaps here, it sounds like you, as the quote unquote VC with this broadcast network, you were seeing the financial side of things and seeing, okay, there are a lot of expenses involved with just booking the locations to do the production for the show that you're getting pitched.
That was part of it. But in general, there's a lot of expenses in general for any type of production. And coming from somebody that was producing things with school projects for $5,000, or even as a corporate commercial producer that I was doing as well, where I was shooting, content for, $15,000, $20,000 for an ad campaign. I was surprised that there was hundreds of thousands of dollars, even close to millions of dollars being spent on television shows and short films and movies. And so that was always interesting. I want to say that my internal passion isn't really working with TV and film, although it's incredible to see that come about. I've always been more infatuated with the commercial and advertising side of things. I love working with brands and with product and trying to get their stories across and see how they can connect with their audiences. And so just seeing how we can simplify, or how really I could build technology to simplify that process, was really exciting.
So let's talk a little bit about that initial idea, okay, I'm going to try to build this. It's 5 years ago. So we're looking at 2013. You had just come out of your master's, I'm guessing.
Exactly.
So you come out and you see a couple of these things through internships and through your job, and you have a co-founder. Walk me through what that decision was like to say, you know what, I'm going to try to build this. Did you do it full time? Did you do it part time? What did that all look like?
We are probably, SetScouter in itself, but especially the journey, is the embodiment of the lean startup model. One, because we screwed up and didn't follow it. And then two, we then realized that we weren't doing it right and tried to start again. And so I had to deal with my mom, which was, again, I want to go to grad school. I want to go to Harvard. I want to do my MBA. I need a story to get there. And so how do I get there? Oh, I'll build a company, a startup. That sounds really cool. I'll sell it for $1 million in a year and that'll be amazing. And so I had this deal with my mom. Hey, I'm going to take the same amount of money that we spend on tuition, which in Canada is about $10,000 to $15,000. And keep in mind, I've been working all throughout university and I lived at home. I didn't have that many expenses. So I said, okay, I'm going to give it a year. In 1 year, let's see how far we can get with $15,000. If we get somewhere, great. We'll sell it for $1 million. If we don't get anywhere, then we'll just shut it down and I'll go get a job. I have a master's degree. It's fine. I did probably everything that you shouldn't do as a founder. I immediately started building a website. I started building a website and the product. I didn't talk to any customers. I kind of had this inkling. I knew what I was doing because I had this experience in it, but I started overbuilding everything. I wanted multiple currencies. I wanted multiple this. I wanted, technology to do A, B, Z, everything. Oh yeah. So I kind of built out this product. And then one day I sent it out to my friends and family. And I said, hey guys, this is the beta. Can you just take a look at it and let me know what you think? But please don't send it to anybody else. And later that night, I get a call and it's from a producer. And he says, hey, my friend sent me this website. I'm looking for a film location, shoots in 2 days. Can you help me? Again, being me, I'm like, of course. We had tons of locations. No problem. I hang up the phone and I spent all night on Google Satellite View looking. He was looking for a house with a pool. I spent all night trying to find pools in the city. And luckily, 2 days later, he ended up in a location. And that was actually for a Canadian rock band. We got national press attention for doing this. And it was an amazing way to start. Like, our first client really blew the doors open. And from there, it was just managing clients and starting again, like from what our clients wanted, building out SetScouter the way that it should have been built out from the get-go.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to start with a couple clarifying questions. So one, from earlier on in this interview, you said you were kind of overly optimistic and thought you could build a company and sell it for $1 million, which you just kind of reiterated. When you thought that, was that just because you thought, I have it within me to build a company, and when you build a company, you sell it for $1 million? Or was that from the standpoint of, I see this problem and I know exactly what type of company I'm going to build?
I genuinely thought I was a mix of both, but definitely the first part, which was I thought I could start a company and sell it for $1 million and have that as an awesome story to apply to grad schools.
Okay. And so you said you had a deal with your mom. Was your mom paying for your first year of university? Is that what you're saying? So you convinced her, instead of paying for the first year of university, we're going to take that same money and basically build our own MBA by starting this company?
So my mom definitely helped me out throughout university for sure. Like, I did take student loans. I'm not to say that my mom paid for everything, but she was incredibly supportive. But the deal was essentially, let's just take the equivalent of what I had saved, which was the equivalent of 1 year. Let's see if we can spend that. Yeah, that was definitely a pretty cool opportunity, because now I look back at it, $15,000 to start a company sounds incredible. Like, who can do that anymore? But I guess as like technology evolves, and I talk to people and they say, like, we had to do this huge capital expenditure to build our company. When you're talking about a marketplace in particular, you don't necessarily need a capital expenditure. You just need a website and you need really great people. Yeah, like you can build that for 15 grand. Hell, you could build it for like $200 now by using these marketplace companies online.
And so your V1 that you sent out and had shared and brought in this first customer, did you have a team member that was building that, or did you outsource that? Who built the first product?
So it was definitely a combination of me outsourcing and me also designing the whole thing. So luckily, because I was more creative, I was able to put together, what we call now the user experience. So I was able to put together the front end, and I needed somebody to really get the back end going. But SetScouter in itself was started with a sales first mentality, which was, how can we sell what we do before and then try to build it after? So we still have that mentality to this day, which is, guys, if we have a great idea, let's sell it now, see if customers will pay for it. And if they'll pay for it, then we'll build it into the product. And so I guess like after the first sale, after our first, experience with Headley, which was the band, like doing their music video, it was, hey, what do customers actually want? Let's sell it on the phone. And then after that, we'll build it into product.
And how did you make that kind of shift? Because it sounds like your first product, you just said, I'm going to build it. I'm going to build it the way I envision it. And then if people want it, that'll be great. Then you got one. And then all of a sudden there was like a click that was, or how did that transition happen that, okay, now we're going to go hardcore lean startup model?
It was empowering at that point, because I didn't think we could sell it until we hit some sort of version of our product. And the exact opposite happened. It seemed like the product was irrelevant. It was just, could you deliver on my service? Like, could you do what I needed you to do? And it all became about efficiency after that. So yeah, I can definitely find you a location. And it might take me the first time, at that point, it might take me a week to find the right location until I get the right supply. But then how can I make my process more efficient? And then from there, how do I expand that out so that customers themselves can be efficient without having me involved? And so that's kind of been the shift. And so after the first client, I got another few. And then I just was always talking to friends of mine that I had throughout undergrad and some mentors. And so one of them was my co-founder. And at that point, I had a few customers, but I was really like stretched. I felt like I couldn't manage the product and the development, and I couldn't also do sales and the customer success and experience. And so I remember like chatting with Lydia, who I would talk to all the time. I'd be like, Lydia, I need your help with this. I need your help with that. And at one point I just said, man, Lids, I need your help. can you just do this with me? And luckily she was itching to do something like this as well. And she took the plunge. And she's been my co-founder ever since. And it's incredible working with her. And so I remember a very clear conversation with her where she said, listen, I know I want to start my own business. I know I want to work on a business, but I just don't know if location scouting is what I want to work on. I asked her, I was like, why? She's like, well, it just sounds boring. It sounds like tedious. Like it's not something that people want to do. I remember looking at her, I'm like, exactly. Imagine if we can win this. Imagine if we can make it so that no producer ever dreads location scouting anymore. And she was all hands on deck at that point.
What time frame was that you and Lydia started working together as co-founders?
It was probably a year after I started the company.
What experience did you have with direct location scouting before that? And how was the process done without SetScouter?
I actually didn't have any location scouting experience at all. I knew of it because I was trained as a producer, and producers can basically do a lot of things. They're trained to put out fires. So I knew the theory behind location scouting, but I definitely was not a location scout. Location scouts are, really professional experts. They have catalogs of locations, relationships of people that they've worked with, and they have this eye to find these really cool things. My whole thought was, okay, how do we commoditize that process? How do we make it so that location scouts and producers don't necessarily have to drive out and spend weeks and weeks trying to find the right location? How do we just give them a database or a catalog that they can get access to? And so the real powerful part about SetScouter is that if you only have 2 weeks to turn around a location for a commercial that you're shooting, well, you're going to hire somebody or you're going to do it yourself, and you're going to be driving around all day trying to find that slot. On SetScouter, you can do that in less than a day. So in less than a day, you can find options for your production that will fit. And the best part is, because we specialize in residential homes, if I need to find a restaurant, I could probably Google 10 restaurants and see what the inside looks like. But if I have to find a residential home, short of like peering through their window and potentially getting the cops called on you, there's not a really good way of seeing the inside of people's houses. And so that's what we specialize in, and that's what we do really, really well.
What is the margin for a location scout? Like, how do they get paid in the traditional location scouting industry?
So there's two. The really professional seasoned location scouts will get paid a per day rate. So they are on your production team. They'll make between $500 to $700 per day, and they'll work probably about a week, 2 weeks to try to find you a location. And those are the really the unionized ones, the ones that are great. Then there's some location scouts that will actually mark up locations. So they'll say, hey, what's your budget? Your budget is $5,000. Great. I have a location. And then they'll say it's cost $5,000. They'll go to the location owner, say, we have a $2,000 budget, and they'll keep $3,000. Not all of them are like that, but there definitely was a growing trend of people that were trying to operate in that capacity.
Can you talk to me about what the rise of home sharing technology like Airbnb and VRBO? I'm trying to think back when Airbnb and VRBO started and how that correlates to when you were starting as SetScouter. I would assume both of those websites were very helpful for the traditional location scouts. Can you talk to me about anything you know in that context?
Absolutely. So when I was starting out, definitely I was looking at Airbnb as, what an awesome idea. And it's crazy that it's working. But look at the traction that they're getting. The difference that I think affects filmmakers and producers the most is that they're mostly in cities, and they're mostly going to be smaller types of spaces. So condos are good examples of the most ideal Airbnb or VRBO, a space that you can necessarily just come and sleep in and stay in and go explore the city. They have a lot of density of that. But when you're looking at it from a production side, I don't necessarily need a place that's right downtown. I need a place that fits my look and my vision. And that might not be 5 locations that all have the same style of kitchen and the same kind of shoebox layout. I need a location that has maybe dark counters or white counters, or I need, the sun to hit it this way, or I need the living room or this type of decor. And so having that variety of locations is really important, at least on SetScouter. And so that's where I see producers are kind of shying away from Airbnb and VRBO and going either with a professional location scout or with a platform like us.
So I think this might be a good time to just define what Set Scouter is in your own words and how it's changed in the last 5 years? What was it when it was founded, and what is it today?
So SetScatter simplifies productions. We just start by simplifying the location setting process. And what that means is that SetScatter is a marketplace that connects agency and commercial producers with residential spaces for commercial production. We specialize in getting producers into locations in less than 1 day and 60% cheaper than traditional methods. And we get to work with amazing brands like Google and Amazon and Coca-Cola and Visa, and the list goes on and on. When it started, it was essentially focused on how can we just fix location scouting and how can we make that easier. And as we've grown, we've realized that there's a lot in production that can be simplified, and we can absolutely be the ones that win and take that over because we have the expertise. We're a team of producers. We have the technology chops, and that's validated by the fact that we are able to build an incredible platform that does work with productions every single day. And 2 or 3, I don't even know what number I'm on, but really we're the team to win because we just really understand this industry. We're in love with this industry, and we want to make it better, and we want content to rule. We know that content is king. Let's let it free.
So you mentioned your team a lot in that response, and we talked a little bit about Lydia earlier. What is your guys' role now that you've been kind of co-founders for about 4 years? How has that co-founder dynamic worked? What do each of you do? And then what does your team look like now?
When we started the company, people would look at Lydia and I and say, you guys double up on skills. Neither of you are technical. So you guys have the same background as well. Like, Lydia was a television producer. So she produced like TV shows, and she had a production company as well. So she had experience in all of the budgeting and financing and the actual production as well. But people will look at us and say, like, okay, you guys are the same thing. Like, go get a technical co-founder, go bring somebody on that can handle the tech. And we just there was this inherent trust between us. Like, we have the same cultural upbringing, the same background, we went to the same program, and we gravitated towards each other throughout undergrad because we were always really in love with the business of production as opposed to going out there and creating, a film. And so we always looked at each other, and we knew that we could trust each other's judgment and get advice from each other. And then it was when we started working together, we almost found our natural spots. Like, Lydia's incredible at empathizing with our customers and understanding where we need to go to really service them. And I think what I do really well is I look for efficiencies and how we can make the process easier on ourselves. So the way that we naturally divided was Lydia took over the sales and the customer support and experience, and I took over naturally what a CEO would do, which is the financing and the team, but also the product. And so it's a really cool divide because she trusts me to take her learnings and apply them, and I trust her to gather that insight from our customers.
And you've told us before that you have about 12 people on your team now. What's the rest of the team makeup look like?
Yeah, so we have a product team, which is great. So that's a couple of developers and a designer. And then we have a supply team that helps with onboarding locations to our platform, as well as a sales team that helps our customers find the right locations and walks them through that process.
And can you just talk to me quickly about personnel costs in Toronto? I'm familiar with them in New York and Silicon Valley and the Midwest of the United States, but I don't really understand the Canadian market for talent.
The Canadian market for talent is definitely easier to swallow than when we were in the Valley for 500 startups. When we were in the Valley for 500 startups, I was so shocked at how much people cost. And for a marketplace like us, where your expenses are 90% people, being in the Valley just wasn't reasonable for us. So when we went through the 500 startups program, we brought our team down. At that point, we were myself, Lydia, and 3 others. And so we lived in a house like Silicon Valley style. We lived in a house with 5 people and 1 bathroom, and it was a nightmare, but we loved it. And then we moved back to Toronto because, well, 1, we pay everybody in Canadian. We get paid in American. So right there, it's about a 25 to 30% boost in revenue. And salaries are reasonable. You're not spending, 100 grand for an office manager like you are in the Valley.
I'm interested to hear more about your experience during that time that you were in Silicon Valley and what advantages or disadvantages outside of the cost of living that you experienced as set scouter in that location.
Silicon Valley was incredibly eye-opening, especially for a founder from Toronto, because Toronto is an amazing city for tech, and it's getting a lot of press these days for its incredible diversity and the amount of companies that are here. But when I was trying to raise a seed round, everyone in Toronto wanted one of a few things, which was, are you health tech? Are you fintech? Are you patentable hardcore technology? And if you're not, what are you doing here? And so I was really hitting a wall when I was trying to raise a small seed round at that time. And I just felt really discouraged. And then miraculously, and I'd love to talk about this, about how we got into 500 startups, but the first day in the Valley, I remember being at 500 and around me was a product manager at Facebook, product manager at Airbnb, and a growth manager at Lyft. And I remember just looking at them and saying, like, a little shyly, I was like, hey, we have a marketplace. And they were like, oh my God, marketplaces. We love marketplaces. Tell us about it. Like, tell us about your supply, your demand, like, tell us all these things. And that was so reassuring because I finally felt as though I could talk to people that had experience, have seen companies scale, and have been on the ground with them. So I loved it there. My team would be back there in 500 at the drop of a hat. We would do the whole program again and have that experience again. And for my own sanity, I like to fly out to the Valley every once in a while just to get reinvigorated by that spirit and by feeling like, there's so much opportunity in this world and you just have to think bigger.
So why are you in Toronto?
Toronto's a great place to be. It's East Coast. A lot of our customers are on the East Coast. There's great tax advantages to being in Toronto. So we get a large percentage of our expenditures back. And on top of that, there's a lot of talent here. I mean, you have the University of Waterloo, which is probably one of the best engineering and computer science schools in North America. You have University of Toronto, you have Ryerson. There's a lot of talent here. And it's Toronto, which is like the capital of Canada.
So tell me about the story of getting into 500 startups. It sounds like it's a unique, different story than your typical application and entry, and I'm interested in hearing about it.
Getting into 500 startups was quite possibly the very definition of imposter syndrome. Because to give you kind of a sense, I didn't let my team unpack their bags for 2 weeks after we arrived. They were not allowed to, because I was convinced that 100% they are going to realize that they made a mistake and they're going to send us home. And the story comes that we were part of Communitech, which is an incubator in Kitchener, Waterloo. Part of that program was that you would get a government convertible note. So if you finish the program and the government, in this case, is called the Business Development Bank of Canada, the BDC, if BDC liked your company, then they will invest $150,000, which to us is huge at the time. It was a monster. And part of that relationship was Nicole LeBlanc, who was an investor there, who actually took the chance on us, said, we're happy to give you the $150,000, but there's one condition. You need to raise another $200,000. And this is when I kind of went out and talked to every angel in the city, talked to every fund, and nobody was cutting me a check. Nicole made an introduction to 500 startups. And at that point, I thought it was to learn about the program. To give more context, like Lydia and I, we flew down to SF like a little bit earlier with some friends of ours that just got on the most recent batch. We met with 500. At that time, we kind of saw that, hey, these guys aren't really production focused. They're not really, advertising focused. Maybe it's not the right fit for us. So during my first Skype call, which I thought was me trying to get more information about how the program evolved, Chris, who was interviewing me at the time, turned around and said, hey, we don't have time to go over the program. Like, this is your first interview. Are you ready or are you not? I went, oh my God, okay, let's do this. And from the moment we got in, we had 3 days to be in Mountain View. So it was surreal. Like, first day flights, second day Airbnb, then getting all of our insurance and moving the company down to the Valley.
I've heard this mad dash to just move there for 500 startups before. I have to think this is just a systemic thing they do to see how you handle it. Like, were there any companies that were given like 3 weeks notice? Like, okay, you guys need to be here a month from now to start the accelerator. Or is everybody just like, they find out 3 days before?
So there is one company that did get 3 weeks, and I was incredibly jealous, and they're doing amazingly well. I have heard that people do get in early, but this is, I think, part of the reason why I didn't let my team unpack their bags, is because they only had 3 days. Like, realistically, we had been talking for a month, and we've been updating them with traction and answering their questions for a month. But from decision to program time, we didn't really sleep. We were just there, and it was scary. I definitely, looking back, like, we definitely belonged. Our traction numbers were good. They're in line with where the other companies were, whether it was RapChat or whether it was Long Guru or LawTrace. But at the time, like, those companies looked like they were doing incredibly well. They had their shit together. And it was just us at the time just trying to figure this out.
So talk to me about what kind of numbers you look at when you're thinking about your traction. What are the kind of key KPIs? Just KPIs.
For a marketplace, our KPI right now is our gross merchandise volume. So how much money are we transacting through the platform, and how is that growing month over month, quarter over quarter? We actually look as well at our repeat usage rate. And so how is that? Is that consistent? Is that staying the same? Is that going down, or is it growing? And so the real thing that we have that we think is super, super cool is that, we have over 50% repeat rates for our productions every single month. And that number grows. And then on top of that, when it comes to onboarding new users and it comes to user growth, we're seeing that a large percentage of new users are coming from direct word of mouth referrals. And so that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because people love our product and they're using us and they're recommending us. It's a curse because it's really hard to track. And so how do you scale word of mouth referrals? And that's really interesting as to like a challenge that we're facing now as we go into where the company's going to be the next 12 to 18 months.
So what does your GMV number look like right now?
So we don't publicly disclose our GMV number, but when we went through the 500 startups program, we were in a slow season and we were doing about 30,000, give or take $30,000 GMV a month. Without publicly disclosing it, that number now is practically a joke for us.
So you mentioned earlier that your costs are like 90% people, but that you have a good amount of people staffed on the sales side of things. So I was wondering what your like costs of getting a new person on the demand side is, or on the supply side. We can go through both, I guess.
What excited 500 startups really about us was the fact that we were able to onboard supply super cheaply. And on top of that, our supply is an interesting use case because unlike Airbnb or any of these other kind of money-making websites, we have a low-touch supply. So people aren't joining our website anticipating to be booked out every single day or every single week. They're looking at it as a cool opportunity. Like, hey, if my home gets shot in, then that's a cool experience that I get to tell my friends. And I don't need that every single week. If it happens once a year or once a quarter, and that's great. And so that low touch supply really helped 500 get excited about what we were doing. And then from the demand side, when it comes to like user cost and acquisition, we've been so overwhelmed with just the amount of producers that are coming to us requesting spaces and booking spaces to our platform and getting that process down, that walking through customer acquisition side of things is really experimentations that we're taking care of now. And we're really lucky to be able to say that we've been able to get to profitability with 12 employees on just inbound growth. And now the question is like, realistically, how do we scale beyond word of mouth? And how do we get to the next stage? And how do we actually deploy capital in a smart and efficient way?
And how does SetScouter make money?
We make money by charging a 20% service fee on top of a rental. So if a producer is going out there and spending or booking a location for $1,000 for all the services and fees or all the services that SetScouter provides, we charge a 20% service fee on top of that $1,000. So the producer will end up spending $1,200 and we get to keep $200 of it.
And nothing on the supply side?
We don't charge supplies for anything.
In your demo day deck for 500, you talked about the number of commercials that are booked each year. something Eric and I kind of struggled to make tangible in our research was the market size and what you're viewing as your market opportunity. Can you talk to us about that?
That's a great question and something that we've definitely had pushback, especially in the early days with investors when we reached out to them. This is such a challenge for us to figure out because we always had two things that were really important to us, which we're trying to communicate that, yes, there are traditional video and agency production companies out there, but a large or a growing percentage of users on our platform are people that are like you two. Like you two decide that you want to put together some sort of content. You end up, let's say you guys start a production company, you get an awesome client, you start producing for them, and then you roll that out and you create your own production company after that. And that's not tracked anywhere. So to be able to say that there's X amount here and X amount there, it was really difficult to get that out. So here's what we do now. According to the research that we found, we know that the industry for film and television spends about $67 billion on expenses. If we take out the key players in those, and we just look at companies that have under 100 employees, and again, these are companies that are registered as production agencies or at agencies, we're looking that if we remove it, there's about $20 billion of expenditures in there. So that's $20 billion being spent on producing video content. And if you even break down the budgets based on what I've seen and what our customers are telling us, about 30% of that is being spent on locations, equipment, wardrobe, and all of these other costs that are there to make their productions happen. There's about $6 billion being spent in an immediate addressable market that we can go after in North America alone. That's sizable for us. There's meat on that bone.
And if you look at that from just the number of players, you guys aren't a pure, this is an assumption, so tell me if I'm wrong here. This isn't just a pure volume game because this isn't the mass market of the traveler the way Airbnb is booking their demand side of things. You guys have a set number of content creators, agencies, etc. And is that why you look at repeat business so much?
Absolutely. We look at repeat business because it's a good KPI in terms of how healthy we're doing as a company in terms of can we actually, do they like us enough to use us again? But also because we know that in order to grow this into $100 million, billion-dollar business, we have to dive deep. And we can't dive deep if customers are churning left, right, and center. So right now, we're working on production film locations. Tomorrow it might be, the insurance and the crew and all this other stuff. So for us, we know we have to dive deep and we have to own the entire production workflow and simplify production.
Do you have, I think we just started to go down a depth channel, but I want to go breadth first and then we can dive back into that. Do you have an understanding of how that $6 billion is kind of spread amongst cities? Because as my understanding is right now, you kind of have 6 target cities. Are you going to expand into new cities, or is 80% of the spend happening in those 6 cities and those are where you want to focus?
The majority of spend in North America is actually within 7 cities. So that's Toronto, Vancouver, from the Canadian side of things, Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. And then there's LA, which is the biggest, followed by New York City, Chicago, and Miami. And so when we look at commercial productions, those are the main cities that we have to target. By winning those cities, we win. So although we would love to work in Columbus, if we're not in Columbus, it doesn't mean that we can't lead the market. And on top of that, we have locations everywhere in the world, which is pretty cool. The fact that I can almost travel anywhere and see a location that's listed on SetScatter. But as a sales focus, right now our markets are Toronto, Miami, Chicago, and New York City. Those are our key cities. But we do service productions in LA and Vancouver and kind of all over the place. All over the place within North America, I should say. We don't do anything internationally. And so just focusing on those main cities, that to us is going to be a huge win.
So you started to talk about insurance and production and things. I'm guessing that's because some of those expenses are baked into that $6 billion market you're talking about. And so you're trying to go wider than just location. You're trying to grab more of what that $6 billion expenditure is going towards. Can you talk about that in the future of SetScouter?
We knew that when we started the company, the easiest way to win would be through locations because it was so tedious and so cumbersome. And it was early enough in the production process that when I'm producing something, I need to kind of lock in my location and get my client to approve it. And then I can kind of cost out the rest of how much this is gonna be. So depending on the location, I know how many lights I need, how many crew members I need, and so on and so forth. And so if we could win our customers' trust by getting locations, which is super cumbersome, we thought that we could also win their trust when it comes to working down the line of what they need for their production. That is slowly but surely showing up as a positive indicator towards the next steps for our company, which is clients are coming to us saying, hey, great, by any chance, do you also do this? Do you also do that? And right now the answer is no, but soon it will be absolutely. And here's how we could help out. So realistically, the vision that Lydia and I have for this company is that we will sit beside a producer who is sat in an agency or in a brand, and we will enable them to be as efficient and as powerful as they can be without having to hire 4 or 5 people just to help with their production. That they'll be able to do everything that they need to do from the SetScouter platform to create amazing, awesome content.
What's the biggest threat to SetScouter? What could happen that this kind of upward momentum doesn't continue?
It's a great question, and this definitely keeps me up at night, which is 2 things. It's like, can we win the trust of our customers that they're able to look at us as their go-to resource instead of doing things themselves, which is traditionally going out and finding locations or hiring traditional location scouts, which, by the way, traditional location scouts love our platform and we work with them all the time. But definitely, we actually look to them as well for help on certain things. And the second thing is, like, can we penetrate markets fast enough so that we can actually provide value? A lot of our effort now is how do we grow within our newest cities? How do we continue that growth?
Alex, something I told Eric about in our intro, I do courses for LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. And I was talking to my producer about SetScouter because I was asking him, hey, is this a problem that you guys face? Is this something that you deal with? And his first response was, that's awesome. We struggle with this all the time in finding locations. And his second thought was, but also I feel like if we are going through a service that is giving us explicit connection to homeowners who know we're coming in to film, it might be more expensive. Is that something that you hear from producers, and what's your feedback to that?
Definitely, when we look at that market segment of people who aren't creating content regularly and who are maybe doing lower budgeted productions, that's definitely an issue, and that's something we're going to be focusing on over the next, I'd say, 3 to 6 months to really address, is to how do we get producers to get over the mental barrier of this may be more expensive. But if we look at our target market right now, the customers that we currently have are agency producers, production houses that are shooting content, and they have about 10 to 15 people crews. They have thousands of dollars that they can spend on a location. And so just by winning them, that's the immediate win for us. And then we can move down market to the lower budget.
And so if that's the segment you're tackling first, and you said you save 60% on average for those folks, where does that 60% come from? Is that because the talent scout isn't upmarking it and you're just taking out a middleman?
The 60% really is the time that they would have spent either themselves finding the location or hiring a location scout to do that. Keep in mind, in production, you're paying everybody day rates until the production's done. So if I'm a producer and I get my day rate and I don't have to go out there and find a location, or if I can't afford a location scout, which is a huge segment of our customers, they have a budget, they just don't have a budget big enough to get somebody else involved to help them find the location. So they often have to get their production manager or their production assistants to try to find a space. So we help them become more efficient, and that's where the saves are from. Because we have such a large variety of locations, you're also saving money on the space themselves. So because a traditional catalog will have a location that's maybe rented out 10 or 15 times, they have that experience and they're like, oh, well, this big film came and spent $20,000 for one day. Like, I want that. And on our platform, that isn't the case. So you can negotiate with the homeowners directly. You could say, our budget is, $2,000 or $1,000 or $500. Can you accommodate us? And a lot of the times you'll see that homeowners will.
You talked about word of mouth being such a big driver for customer acquisition. What's the velocity of producers that work for Google then moving and working for a different company and bringing SetScouter with them?
That is such a great question. And that's something that we're so excited about, which is if you are a producer, we kind of watch you grow. So we watch you start as maybe a production assistant or a production manager, and then you become an associate producer or producer. And as you move agencies, and this is the nature with freelance as well, is that you're working for multiple companies at one time. You have the opportunity to expose SetScouter to everybody on your production crews at all your agencies. And we'll see it where you have the clients actually hear about us from the production companies, and then for their next projects, they're searching for locations, and then they get their production company or agency to start looking at us because of it. And so there's cool, I wouldn't call it virality because it's not like explosive growth that everybody and your uncle is on, but definitely industry wise, it's really cool to see that organic growth.
So on the topic of growth, you've mentioned a couple times about expansion, whether it's geographic or it's services based or it's new client offering. You're also profitable. So I'm curious if you are looking at fundraising and what you think that is going to look like, or if you're going to continue to operationally leverage your profit going forward.
So before getting into 500 startups, the fact that fundraising was so difficult for us, Lydia and I actually had a conversation of, what the hell do we do? We don't want to be that company that ends up raising a seed round and then can never raise money again and just dies out into oblivion. So for us, the focus was always, how do we get as much optionality into the company as possible? And so we rallied the team around it and said, hey guys, we want the best possible outcome for this company and for everybody here. So let's see how close we can and how responsibly we can get to become profitable and still grow, still have that there. And so, the team being behind that really helped. Definitely there will be another fundraising event in the future. We just have the flexibility now to go after somebody that's really right for us, that can help put dollars towards growth and that expansion, as opposed to kind of taking money because we need to. So if we don't fundraise, we know SetScouter is going to be here for the next 5, 10, 20 years. We know that we can operate this business and continue to make it more efficient and continue to grow. But really the next step for us is, how the hell do we explode the roof off this thing without burning down the house?
Are there any questions that we should be asking that we're not asking?
That is possibly my favorite question that I've ever heard. Yeah. So one of the things that I'd love to talk a little bit more about was this idea of why Toronto's home for us. And 500 startups, our batch was incredible because we had companies from everywhere. And a lot of them ended up coming back to Toronto with us. And the reason is because, it's no secret that your political climate it's harder for people to get status in America. And Canada has been a really good refuge for that. But there's a lot of government programs and incentives here that make it very capital efficient for companies to operate. So there's, the National Research Council that will fund certain applications if you can show that there's experimental, industrial design or something patentable in the future. Companies in Canada particularly rely on SHRED, which is the scientific research and experimental development tax incentive, where you get a portion of your R&D research back from the government. So a lot of founders and companies look at fundraising as, I need to get this investor in. But, government grants and government tax incentives are non-dilutive fundraising. It's another avenue for companies. And really that's helped us and almost every other Toronto tech startup.
Well, Alex, I appreciate you being on the show with us today. I also appreciate some of the resources you sent us ahead of time. The one commercial you sent for PlayStation 4, I clicked that. I was like, okay, let's see one of these commercials that used SetScouter. And in that commercial is a guy I went to college with and did improv and was a writer for a satirical magazine. His name is
awesome.
His name is Nate Verone. He lives in Chicago. He's on the touring group with IO, I believe. Just such a small weird world. He was the dude with the mustache and the parted hair that was a weirdo.
That's awesome. What's incredible for me, and I think not a lot of people recognize, is that when they think of the stuff that we do, they always think of these big commercials that are being shot with movie stars. But if people just take a moment to just really see all the content that they're being pushed, and all of the Facebook ads and the Instagram ads and the YouTube pre-rolls and all this random stuff that agencies are billing and creating, you'll see that a lot of them require spaces, a lot of them require houses. And that's really what we're trying to go after and target. And that's what's exciting to me. It's like you watch a Super Bowl commercial and like 70% of all the commercials feature a house. That's great. But then you also like try to watch your favorite clip on YouTube and you're getting pre-rolled by Advil and Tylenol commercials. And those are also in homes, and those had to be shot somewhere. So it's really cool to see that what we do subliminally affects everybody.
After the show, if people want to learn more about you or Set Scouter, where should they go?
If people want to learn more about Set Scouter, if they want to join the squad, or if they want to list their home or look at locations for their next production, please visit setscouter.com. And if you want to reach out to me, you can go to LinkedIn or alexkolodkin.com, which actually redirects right to my LinkedIn. And I love talking to other founders. I love learning from other founders. And that helps me grow as an individual. And I'd love to share my experiences as well with them.
Great. Alex, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's great talking with you guys.
All right, Eric, we just spoke with Alex Kolodkin, the co-founder and CEO of Set Scouter. And now on to one of our favorite parts of this show, talking about the opportunity. Let us now talk about our feelings and thoughts about Set Scouter and the opportunity present here.
I like that you brought our feelings into it. Like, we got to get really emotional here on the deal memo section of the upside.
We don't have to get emotional, but it's good to be in touch with our feelings.
Have you been in touch with your feelings a lot lately, Jay?
I have, an unfortunate amount.
Well, that's what happens when you get a little bit stressed out. Those emotions kind of creep up. You know what? I just want to jump in and say, off the bat, Set Scouter reminds me a lot of Lawn Guru from a business model and just general like vibe, which is weird because they're both in the same cohort, but even if they weren't.
In the same pod even.
In the same pod, exactly. They just, so much feels similar between the two of them to me. For the listeners who are new, we interviewed Lawn Guru on episode 3.
Nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it. So we interviewed Lawn Guru on episode 3, and I see a lot of similar structures, meaning they're both profitable. They are businesses that appear to really focus on one half of a marketplace, providing excessive amounts of value. In Lawn Guru's case, it was for outdoor companies, providing them the back-end support they need to run a more efficient shop. In Set Scouter's case, it's the same thing, but it's for producers and broadcasters.
And the technology in both cases is seemingly a natural progression of the solution for the people involved, right? The set scouting process to this point sounds like has been very analog and manual. The actual scouters having literal catalogs of locations, and it just makes sense that that can be brought online and searched and parsed and planned much more easily. Hot take, my biggest question on this opportunity, Eric, is the market size. And we talked about it in the intro, being hard to define. We asked Alex, he said that's a good question. We had a hard time defining this. We kind of did a top-down, or he talked us through a top-down approach of there's a $67 billion expenditure in this industry, but broke that all the way down to $6 billion that's actually used on locations, equipment, and wardrobe. I don't think that included insurance, but he talked about insurance as well. So you're talking about potentially a $6 billion market for the location scouting product, which it has to play just a segment of that $6 billion market too, because that's locations, equipment, and wardrobe. So what were your thoughts on the market size here?
I agree. I think the $6 billion might be a little bit too large because it does take in locations, equipment, and wardrobe. And I don't know what the breakdown between those is, but I would assume equipment's probably the biggest section of those. Maybe a bad assumption on my behalf. Regardless, even if it's 33, that's still only a $2 billion market as opposed to a $6 billion market, which is what the number we're playing with right now.
Right. And something that may be related to the market size, our competitive analysis here usually you would think that something that's a large opportunity has more competition in it, right? We found that one website seems relatively new. The tech is way less sophisticated. The other competitors in the space are the traditional routes of scouts with catalogs. And then you have platforms that you could use for a similar service, but you kind of have to do a workaround, Airbnb and VRBO, for example. So it seems like SetScouter is kind of playing in a league of its own here, and that either means that they're early to market and early to identify an opportunity that other people haven't caught on to, which would be a great thing, or it means that it's a small market and people just aren't chasing it.
I feel like it's also one of those markets that's so relationship based. So it's just hard to break in with a tech product. He talks about the virality of it with, okay, one team used it and then people move around all the time and they're fluid. So then they go to another team and they use it and then everyone gets exposure there. And I think that's just something that takes time is, okay, I'm a lighting guy for movies and I see someone use SetScouter for our location. And I see another person use SetScouter and I see another person use SetScouter and I say, well, maybe this thing has some legs, but it might take a few years before I really decide, okay, this is something I'm willing to try versus using Mary, who we've used for 40 years.
That's a great point. In breaking in, it would be difficult to find the very specific buyer within the very specific type of companies looking for this. I'm going to keep going down the shadow route because I think this is a good thing to talk about. The other shadow to me was some of the feedback that we got from my contact that I spoke with. I've seen this in reviews relating to the price of this service. So for the companies that it's good for, it's great for, right? The companies that have a larger budget and they're already putting it aside. The 60% cheaper statistic that Alex shared with us, he said was derived from the time savings that people generally spend finding locations, not necessarily the pricing itself. And so I wonder if that limits the market more or presents an opportunity for expanding the market, because he talked about general content creators or YouTubers who could use this service. I would just imagine they have a smaller budget, and if this is cost prohibitive, they wouldn't be able to really play in that space.
Right. To grow outside of the big names, the Unilevers, the McDonald's, the ones that they have right now. Maybe there is a different type of business model. Maybe it's just an expansion of their business model. And that gets to expansion, which is something that I think is really interesting because they can capture 80% of the market by being in 6 cities. That is unique, I think, to a few different industries, but it is pretty awesome that they don't have to expand geographically because expanding geographically is very expensive. We saw it with Tiller on episode 1 when their raise was essentially, well, we need to raise money so we can expand. We've heard it before as well.
And he spoke to that about 500 startups being stoked about that aspect of their business was that their supply side was sort of low touch. And I think that speaks both to it seemed like people were interested to join the platform, and it wasn't that they were renting out their location every week, but also to the fact, to what you're saying, it's a limited market play, as a number of markets. It also seems like it probably gives them an opportunity to expand in a more reactionary way than proactively necessarily, because if you have one of your clients, say it's McDonald's, saying, we're going to be in Minneapolis and we want to shoot one of these shots, SetScouter can kind of just go in and handpick what they're looking for, building their own catalog based off of things like Airbnb and VRBO.
Right, which was his initial business model, which was everything is reactionary. Well, not his initial business model. His initial business model was I'm going to build this product completely, and then as soon as he realized he can do things reactionary. Yeah, so I agree with you there. I think it also gives them the flexibility to expand their service offerings because they don't have to expand geographically. So any money that they raise, and he either hinted at this or said it, can be expanded into equipment and wardrobe and insurance. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that there's a ton of other spaces that they can expand into and still have 80% of the market available in those 6 cities.
Which is great if they have a 50% rebooking rate, I think that month he said, for a lot of their customers. It sounds like it's a sticky product for the people that are using it, which is great. And that would lend itself to say they would be able to vertically integrate.
You know, I'm not really sure if it's one or the other. I think those terms might be a little bit more industrial era, but they definitely are complementary services.
Yeah, either way, if this is a sticky product and people are already handling some of these other problems and services outside of SetScouter, it would make sense that SetScouter could bring those in-house and reduce the number of vendors and services and interfaces that people are dealing with.
Jay, we've done something a little weird here in this deal memo that we don't usually do.
We haven't talked about the founder.
At all.
You're right.
Very, very odd. Usually we spend so much time talking about the founder, and I'm curious to you if that's because this is a foregone conclusion that Alex is great, or there's a lot of issues and we want to save it till the end.
Are you putting me on the spot?
Oh, I'm putting you on the spot.
No, I like Alex. I like his openness to talking about the challenges that they had and his learning in going from a non-lean startup method to figuring out, okay, instead of trying to build it all up front, let's do this. He was also really honest about his assumption that, well, I can just build a business and sell that for $1 million. That'll pay for an MBA. I love that audacity, and I love that mindset, and I wish I could bottle that and retain that mindset myself so I could just barrel into things. And not to mention his experience in the production space beforehand. I think that gives him a leg up in the space where, like you said, it's probably very relationships driven.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he's got a fantastic background for this. He said it himself. He's overly optimistic and a little bit cocky. And I don't know, maybe that's what you need to succeed in the film industry, just looking around it. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's what you need to succeed in the startup industry. Maybe it's not. Maybe it just works for him. Either way, I think that they're doing a really nice job, and you can tell that he's committed because they've been doing this for 5-6 years.
And it shouldn't be glossed over that this is a profitable company with 12 employees that's been in business for a handful of years already. We sought out Alex to come on the show. He's not doing a road show trying to raise capital right now. I think there's something to be said about that too. So, you have to be a pretty good leader to stick with something for a number of years, and also stick with something for a number of years while being profitable, while having employees and entering into a new market. So, I don't have any red flags.
I don't have any red flags either. I think that one thing that was kind of telling and just something to think about, and maybe when you're international, you think about this more, but was something he mentioned that they were making money in American and paying people in Canadian. So they had a arbitrage profit on currency. And that was part of his question, or part of his answer for why Toronto. And I just thought that was something that, maybe it came up in the course of business, but as a founder, just being able to think through that and being like, okay, this is something that we should stick with right now. It's kind of like that second level thinking.
Yeah. And something that I wish we had spent more time talking about is his co-founder, Lydia. Because as much as we would want to talk about Alex as a founder, we would want to know about Lydia as a founder. And Alex had nothing but positive things to say about Lydia. We just didn't get a whole lot of context. One thing he did say was that they had a duplicative skill set as opposed to necessarily a complementary skill set, or I should say background, maybe. Similar background in where they had worked and what they had learned and what they came into this with. It did sound like they had figured out a division of labor that worked for them very well. We didn't dig a whole lot into their technical team. The benefit of this is it's kind of a B2B platform, right? Which means that the tech and the interface just has to be like functional and pretty good. It's not as demanding in that world for the tech to be beautiful and perfect and flawless and completely intuitive as it is in B2C, like Seth from RapChat. So that's good news. But, poking around the site, it looks like it's very functional, works well. I think they understand their customers well because the information they show about a location is different than the information you would see on an Airbnb profile, for instance. You're not necessarily looking for kitchen amenities. You're looking for markers about the home that you want in your shots. So it's clear that they understand their customers in that way.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also think they have a benefit that Alex has kind of an eye for design, and Airbnb has kind of taken off so aggressively and so hard and so focused on design that they can make and I don't know if you got this feeling as well poking around Set Scouter, but they can kind of take some elements of the Airbnb experience and make it really intuitive for someone who wants to list their property. Like, to me, it felt like, oh, this feels like Airbnb a little bit.
Totally. Smart for two reasons. One, because it's familiar to people who use that. Feels like just about everyone you've talked to has used Airbnb at this point. So it's intuitive just because you've used it before. And as you said, Airbnb puts such a focus in design and user experience that they've done a lot of research, I would assume, I would hope, to show what users respond well to.
So how big can this opportunity be? He said that they might raise to expand. I'm guessing that means expand services. The market's $6 billion, kind of, maybe. He said that they were doing $30,000 a month in gross merchandise value when they were at 500 startups. They take a percentage of that. How do you even come to an idea of the the size of an exit or the size of a recurring profit stream here?
That's hard. And honestly, that's why I started this deal memo with that point. Is that's such an important point for me if I'm looking at this as an investor, to have more insight into both the market and how the company is doing, whether it's GMV or some other measure. And Alex was purposefully a little vague on both of those, which is his decision, and that's fine. But for me, if I don't know those things, it's hard for me to make a strong decision. One thing we do know is in 2015 at the 500 Startups Demo Day, they were boasting $30,000 per month in gross merchandising volume. And he said that is, quote, a joke at this point. So it's higher than that, but how much higher? I don't know.
Right. Is a joke double? Is it 10x? Is it 20x? Is it, who knows? But if we back into it a little bit and we start with the $6 billion of spend, that's effectively $6 billion of gross merchandise value that could pass through the platform. Let's assume that the $6 billion is all for locations at this point. I know it's not. Let's not make that assumption. Let's change. Let's go to 2 billion. Let's do our 33, 33, 33. And let's say that it's $2 billion of gross merchandise value that exists in North America that SetScouter could capture. Now, 80% of that is the markets that they're in, and it doesn't sound like they're looking at actively expanding. So we'll call it 1.5 billion. It's 1.6, but we'll round.
I like it. Makes it simple for me. Thank you.
No problem. Then he mentioned that they take 20% on every transaction. So if there's 1.5 billion that goes through the platform, 20% of that, you're looking at $300 million of revenue every single year. So if we think about multiples, 1 to 2x revenue multiple, you're looking at 300 to 600 million as kind of we dominated the market in our 6 cities, got 100% of all of that. That's kind of the maybe top end of what I'm seeing for locations only, not expecting that they expand to equipment or wardrobe or insurance.
So that number was $600 million in revenue potential?
It was 300 million in revenue potential and a exit multiple of 300 to 600 million.
Got it. Yeah. Which is nothing to bat an eye at, for sure. And we get to the age-old question of, well, what are our fund mechanics? What do we care about? Because even at this point, SetScouter could continue on with 12 employees in the markets they're in, and if they have the cash flow mechanisms, grow slowly into those different areas, and they wouldn't necessarily need to raise again. And they could just continue being a profitable company and grow slowly or quickly, whatever happens. That size of a market sounds big enough to invest in for most funds. If you had a $250 million fund, you're looking for a $1 billion exit. So sub that size of a fund, it would make sense as a returnable opportunity, I think. Good math, my dear Watson.
Well, maybe.
Maybe. Well, I can tell you that I know Cover My Meds was doing close to $200 million in revenue when they were purchased for $1.3 billion, which is a high multiple from what I understand as well.
I think that's something that we need to get better at on this show is understanding industry multiples. I just bought a book on it. So as we go forward, I think we'll be able to utilize those a little bit more because they do differ by type of company, type of industry, type of space. And to the extent we can get those down, I think it'll make us a lot stronger.
I'm just excited that we're getting to multiples at all. This is really our first time talking about it on the show. So progress, baby. So Eric, one last question. What are you looking for from SetScouter, call it 12 months from now?
I want to see if they do raise, because if they do raise, the whole idea is going to be that they're going to expand, which means they feel comfortable that they're going to continue to grow at a significant clip in their location service. But it's more important to me to understand if they raise, because if they raise, then I know that they're going to expand beyond location. They feel comfortable with location. So really, to me, it's are they going to raise or not? That is the thing I'm looking at. I don't think that they're going to have any problems raising. I think it's more the decision to do it. And that tells me so much more about the business than any maybe metric at this point could.
I think I'm first and foremost looking for the two figures that we don't know all that well still, which is one, the actual market opportunity, and two, gross merchandising volume going through the platform and how that has grown over time. And after that, I'm with you. I want to see what services they've expanded into and what that outlook looks like for the future as well. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. If we missed anything, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet at us at UpsideFM or send us a message on Breaker. You can comment on Breaker, write on the episode. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what we missed. We'd love to hear the things you agree with, the things you disagree with. We're hanging out there all the time. So tweet at us, email us, hello@upside.fm if you have ideas or guest suggestions. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next week.
Later.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest. So shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter @UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on